CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: artillery fire and clashes reported in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on the first full day of a new ceasefire. Our other headlines: Russia says it's pushed back Ukrainian fighters it blames for attacks on the border city of Belgorod. Snow and ice on the world's highest mountain melting faster than ever before, according to Chinese scientists investigating climate change. And time is money. The watch, once owned by China's last emperor, is sold at auction for $6.2 million. Artillery fire and clashes have been reported in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on the first day of a new ceasefire. The 7-day humanitarian truce, which began on Monday, is meant to allow for the delivery of aid. It was brokered following talks in Jeddah and is being monitored by Saudi Arabia and the United States. The Sudanese army and paramilitary rapid support forces have been locked in a power battle since April. At least 850 people have been killed in this conflict, with more than 1 million displaced. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Naba Moeddin in Madani. Naba, first of all, what more can you tell us on today's developments? I think we may have lost the link to Khartoum. We may return to that story in just a few moments. In the meantime, we'll carry on with the rest of today's news. And China has called on the conflicting parties in Sudan to stop hostilities promptly. The Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Dai Bing, says the most pressing task is to make sure civilians are protected. He also urged the international community to step up assistance to Sudan and its neighbours to help ease the humanitarian pressure on the country. Russia says it's pushed back Ukrainian fighters it claims launched a cross-border attack in its western region of Belgorod. Houses, administrative buildings and a kindergarten were damaged in strikes on Monday. Moscow says it has launched an investigation into what it calls a terror attack. Kyiv has denied involvement. Two Russian-backed anti-Kremlin groups, the Russian Volunteer Corps and Freedom of Russia Legion, have claimed responsibility. Well, the head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog has told CGTN he remains deeply concerned about security at Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi says the complex, which has been at the center of months of shelling, remains unstable. Both Moscow and Kyiv have accused each other of attacking the site. Grossi spoke to CGTN about the ongoing diplomatic efforts to try to secure the nuclear plant, which is the biggest in Europe.
We never had a situation like this. Of course, this is in itself already a matter that deserves urgent attention. On top of that, we have seen in the course of the past few months that the plant has been subject to shelling on several occasions. Additionally, the plant, because of the ongoing war, has lost external power supply 6 times, which means that this, the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, was on 6 different occasions operating under emergency mode, so to speak, with emergency generators, which is the last line of defense that such a big, huge facility may have to prevent the meltdown of the reactor cores. So obviously for us this presented us with an unprecedented challenge, and we have been fully mobilized, and I am personally leading a process of consultation, negotiation, you may call it in different ways, aimed at getting some basic principles of protection for this facility, because it is clear that no one, it doesn't matter which side a person might take on this tragic conflict that we are seeing, no one will be spared in case of a nuclear accident with major radiological consequences. So as IAEA, I felt from the very beginning that I should get fully involved and try to bring solutions to the table.
Russia's Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin is in China for a two-day visit. Our correspondent Lou Sarou reports.
Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin has just landed in Beijing. He's on an official visit to China on Tuesday and Wednesday. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said China and Russia would have in-depth exchanges on relations of both sides, and he also hopes that Mishustin's visit would deepen cultural and people-to-people exchanges and would boost global economic recovery. And the Kremlin earlier has also confirmed that economic and trade cooperation is also on the agenda, and special attention would be given to, for example, industry, agriculture, transport, infrastructure, as well as energy. And so several bilateral agreements are expected to be signed as well this time. And over the years, Moscow and Beijing has close relations. For example, in March this year, Chinese President Xi Jinping has paid an official visit in Russia. There, he said, ties are entering a new era. So Mishustin's visit this time is also considered a concrete step of an increasing strong relations. Lu Sirui, CGTN, Beijing.
Let me take you back to our top story now. And artillery fire and clashes have been reported in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on the first full day of a new ceasefire. Let's try and talk again to our correspondent, Naba Moeddin, who's in Madani. Naba, what more can you tell us?
Actually, Jamie, since the ceasefire started and entered into force, eyewitnesses in Khartoum said there was violations of the ceasefire and there was heavy fighting, but it was not in residential areas. It was northeastern Khartoum, where main camps of RSF was located, and there is also mobile units of RSF. The military is trying to use air force to defeat them and stop their advances to the central Khartoum. But in the morning, people felt safer, and they could be able to go to local markets and buy supplies because they said this ceasefire, or they are hopeful that this ceasefire will hold a bit, and it will not be like there will not be the civilians will not be targeted. So people feel safer because for the first time it's monitored by a mechanism contains of members from Saudi Arabia and the United Nations, and also members of warring factions. So people are optimistic, and they think if this ceasefire, Jamie, holds this time, it will pave the way for a longer ceasefire and maybe end this chaotic conflict in the capital, Khartoum.
Now, but the whole point of this ceasefire is to try to facilitate the delivery of aid. What's the latest on the humanitarian situation?
Actually, Jamie, the humanitarian situation is still deteriorated. The organizations right now, they are calling for the two warring factions to open humanitarian corridors. They are monitoring the situation because the ceasefire has just entered into force recently, but there is also small aid, not big aid, that was delivered to Khartoum. It was so difficult to deliver it, but medicine and some food was delivered to people in Khartoum. It is still difficult and challenging for aid workers to deliver aid in Khartoum, but in other states it's more doable, and the United Nations mentioned that they delivered aid, and they actually allocated more than $22 million for refugees in neighboring countries, including Egypt, Chad, Ethiopia, Central African Republic, and South Sudan. The situation is still dire, especially for refugees in Chad, where they are witnessing a dire situation population, and 80% of the refugees are from women and children who left their fathers and parents and husbands in Darfur after the violence broke out a few weeks ago. So the situation is dire, and humanitarian aid workers and UN are trying to do their best to deliver the aid, but the situation is still dire, and there is reports that it will be more difficult for the UN to relocate the refugees in Chad to safer places, as there is the rainy season is coming in few weeks, and it's not safe for them to move because of the rainy season. There will be bigger streams, and it will be very difficult to move, and it will be very difficult to get any supplies. So the situation may get worse, Jamie.
Naba, thank you for that. Our correspondent Naba Moeddin in Madani. India's Prime Minister has received something of a rock star reception on his first visit to Australia since 2014. Thousands of members of Australia's Indian community gave a rapturous welcome to Narendra Modi as he attended a rally in Sydney with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Modi's looking to boost support from expats ahead of next year's election after his party lost a key state vote last month. He'll also hold talks with Albanese on Wednesday. And India has made it compulsory for cough syrup makers to get samples tested before exporting their products. This all comes after Indian-made brands were found to include toxins linked to dozens of child deaths in the Gambia and Uzbekistan. India's $41 billion pharmaceutical industry is one of the biggest in the world. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been granted bail until the 8th of June in a number of cases by an anti-terrorism court in the capital, Islamabad. The opposition leader says he's facing nearly 150 legal cases against him since being removed from power last year. Thousands of people staged protest and attacked public property following Khan's arrest earlier this month. Greece's main opposition party has declined an official offer to try to form a coalition after it suffered a heavy loss in Sunday's election. Syriza says it'll contest a second vote next month. The ruling New Democracy Party, led by the Prime Minister Mitsotakis, fell just short of an overall majority and will attempt to increase its share in the rerun in June. Well, Greece is counting on tourism to try to revive its economy this year. The minister in charge of the sector says summer bookings are already pointing to a new record, and many of those bookings are being made by tourists from China. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas reports.
One of the largest islands in Greece and a popular holiday destination, the island of Corfu is a jewel in the Ionian Sea. Every year, over 1 million holidaymakers travel here. Among the tiny Venetian streets and the medieval castles is where China's Fosun Tourism Group purchased its latest luxury 5-star hotel under the brand Cook's Club. General Manager Vasilis Kastrinos is preparing for a summer without any restrictions.
Για μας ήταν το ξεκίνημα, ήταν κάτι πιλωτικό.
After years of the pandemic and renovations, we opened our doors last year, but only as a pilot project. This year will be a true test for Greece and for us as well. We're better prepared and know what our clients want. That's why our bookings are higher than expected.
The 195-room hotel is offering high-tech services, like digital food ordering, which aims to cut down on food waste. Cook's Club is the latest investment, joining other 8 hotels under the Fosun umbrella on the island of Rhodes, Samos, Mykonos, Crete, Kos, and Evia. And all are expected to be busy, with Greece's tourism ministry predicting another breaking record season. Passenger traffic at Greece's largest airport, Athens International, is already up by 74% in the first 2 months compared to 2022. That's also a rise of 3% on 2019's pre-pandemic levels. The summer tourism season has just started, and it's expected to last at least until October or even November if the sun continues to shine. During that period, more than 30 million people are expected to visit the country, making tourism the backbone of Greece's economy. Most of those tourists fly through Athens or Thessaloniki and travel onwards from there. Now, the government is aiming to change that by giving financial incentives for airlines to offer more direct flights.
We even made some agreements with airline companies in order to be able to subsidize, partly subsidize, winter flights as well. Because we do realize that the main point of discussion here is direct flights or the regularity, of course, of flights that come to Greece, not just to Athens and Thessaloniki, but also to the regional airports. So we have prepared for that. Drafting agreements with airline companies, with large tour operators.
Some of those direct flights have been shifted to Corfu, which sees close to 2,000 flights a month from May to September, carrying more than 500,000 visitors each month. The tourism sector, including China's Fosun Group, are hoping more flights and an extended tourism season will see sunny times ahead for their investment. Evangelos Ipsas for CGTN from the island of Corfu.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, where have all the birds gone? Farmers are urged to change their ways as a study shows fertilizers and pesticides are to blame.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Artillery fire and clashes reported in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on the first full day of a new ceasefire. Our other headlines: Russia says it's pushed back Ukrainian fighters it blames for attacks on the border city of Belgorod. Italy has approved a $2.2 billion relief package for areas hit by flooding. At least 14 people are now known to have died, with tens of thousands forced to leave their homes. Several towns and villages remain partially submerged, and agricultural areas have been ruined. The money includes emergency spending and a halt on tax and social contributions for households and involved companies. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Alex Fraser, watching events for us in Milan. Alex, so just to be clear, this money has been allocated. What happens next?
So the next stage will be looking at how that money can be spent. But of course, there's still a huge effort that's got to take place in terms of just clearing up in these areas. There's been utter devastation. We're talking estimates of billions of dollars worth of damage. The first part of these plans that were approved this morning is talking around $118 million. So you can see that there's going to be a lot that's going to be needed to be done across these different stages. There's talk from some ministers that they will be trying to access EU money as well, in terms of around $500 million to try and help up with these cleanup efforts and to try and compensate some of the people who've lost their homes. And we're talking thousands of people have been displaced. Estimates are anywhere between 20 and 30,000 people are currently away from their homes. And of course, these floods have killed 14 people, as well as devastating agriculture, which is massive for that region, and of course, destroying thousands of homes.
Alex, we've been watching the pictures as you've been speaking. I mean, the pictures are absolutely heartbreaking. You've been to the flood-hit areas. I mean, what are the major challenges in trying to recover, if that's possible, trying to recover from this disaster?
Well, in some of the areas I visited yesterday, including the small town of Consilice, the first problem is still pumping out that water and damming various rivers and canals that have burst their banks. I mean, in that small town alone, it's a town of around 10,000 people. Many streets were still submerged at least 1.5 meters underwater. Now, some of the bigger towns have already pumped out that water and are people trying to move mud from their basements and from the lower floors of their houses. But of course, there's still other risks in terms of foundations of houses, infrastructure, roads, many of them still shut. The motorways are now open, but the main train line is completely closed. So that's the Adriatic coast is cut off from cities like Bologna and central Italy. So there's all sorts of things that will need to be done in terms of infrastructure. There's a lot that's going to need to be done for agriculture, and of course there's going to be a lot of a human cost in terms of whether people's houses can be put back together. And currently the region is still on red alert for further storms and landslides.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Fraser in Milan. Bird numbers across Europe have declined rapidly due to the widespread use of fertilizer and pesticides. A study of data stretching back decades found that there are 550 million fewer birds flying over the continent today than a generation ago. The report pins the blame on industrialized farming and changing weather, and it says bird numbers in cooler northern regions are falling at twice the rate of those in warmer countries. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Jim Drury, who's been following the story. Jim, this makes a pretty bleak reading. 500,000 birds gone. What did the study involve, and what were the main findings?
Well, it's a study with 50 academic researchers who've been looking at data across 28 countries in Europe. They looked at 170 common bird species. The data was found by citizen scientists, so people who've written in and said that they've seen birds in certain areas. And they looked at 4 possible factors that will be driving the loss. And they were looking at climate change, urbanisation, intensive use of pesticides and fertiliser, and changes in forest cover. And what they discovered was that farmland bird species are falling at twice the rate of woodland birds and 3 times the rate of urban birds. And the worst affected are birds that feed on insects. And I spoke to one of the chief authors, who is Professor Richard Gregory from the RSPB, who said that fertiliser use, intensive agricultural farming is clearly the biggest factor to blame.
Well, the farming industry, as you say, has taken a real kicking in this report. What's been the response from the farming industry?
Well, I spoke to the National Farmers Union, who represent farmers across the UK, and they say the study is not robust. They say that they're actually doing a huge amount already to encourage biodiversity on their farms, so they've dismissed the study.
Jim, thank you very much indeed for that. Our correspondent, Jim Drury. The police are searching near a reservoir in Portugal in their investigation into the historic disappearance of a British child. The reservoir is 50 kilometres from where 3-year-old Madeleine McCann was last seen in 2007. German national Christian Bruckner was made a formal suspect by Portuguese authorities last year, but has not been charged and denies any involvement. He's known to have visited this area around the time she disappeared. At least 7 people, including children, have been killed after the roof of a school collapsed during a storm in Thailand. Strong winds hit the gymnasium where the students had been sheltering. 18 others were sent to hospital. A warning for heavy rain has been issued for this week, which marks the official start of the rainy season. Nearly 500 wild species in China have been downgraded from endangered status, according to the latest assessment of plant and vertebrate species. Experts say it shows the improved health of the country's wild plants and a slowdown of the deterioration of vertebrate numbers. A watch once owned by China's last emperor has sold for more than $6.2 million in Hong Kong, more than double its expected sale price. Puyi was the last ruler in the long-running Qing dynasty. Our correspondent Wang Chiwei reports.
Gazing through the kaleidoscope of nearly a century of history, the surface may be scratched, but this watch is highly sought after. It's one of only 8 such models that still exist.
The 96QL Quantum Lune was the most complicated Patek Philippe wristwatch available in the Patek Philippe catalogs in the 1930s. The 96 reference is extremely important for not only watch collectors, but for Patek Philippe itself.
What adds more weight to its value is that the watch once belonged to China's last emperor, Puyi, whose turbulent life was made famous by the Oscar-winning film The Last Emperor.
Stop! The emperor will walk.
Ascending to the throne at the age of just 3, he was forced to abdicate 4 years later. He was used as a political tool by Japan during its war of aggression and occupation, and ultimately taken prisoner by the Soviet Union after World War II. The watch is one of the few items he kept with him. During his time in the Russian jail, Puyi developed a close friendship with his interpreter, Georgy Permyakov. He gave him the watch as a parting gift before returning to China in 1950.
All these gifts to Permyakov, especially the watch, were a sign of something special to him.
Permyakov kept the watch until his death in 2005. Although no one knows when Puyi originally bought the watch, it still offers a rare glimpse into a chapter of history that is not widely known.
This watch is a witness to the historical life of Puyi, the last emperor, especially during his time in Soviet Russia.
Nearly a century has passed, and the last emperor's watch is still ticking, telling the story of a man whose life was never ordinary and deeply rooted in China's history. Wang Qiwei, CGTN.
Snow on the world's highest mountain is melting at a faster rate than ever before. Chinese scientists who climbed Mount Chomolungma, also known as Mount Everest, have been collecting snow and ice samples. They've also been upgrading the world's highest unmanned weather station, which helps to track climate change. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight from me. Goodbye.